So now we move on to change control, which is another topic we would like to discuss, part of the PM life cycle under planning and organization. So as you can see here, we have already discussed all of these, and we're now going to go to change control, deliverables, and outcomes. So part of planning an organization is what we call change control. So it is the process of identifying, documenting, and reviewing all change requests, approving changes, and managing changes to deliverables, organizational process assets, project documents, and the project management plan, and communicating the decisions in line with this. So the changes that we are talking about here may or may not impact the project baselines. Sometimes only the performance against the baseline is affected. So the decisions here are made by the project manager. So these will be quite heavy and crucial decisions to make. So once the project management plan is baseline, so meaning we have the three restrictions here, we have time, of course, if we need to make changes with our timeline, the cost of what we need to spend in our project, and of course, the scope that we need to deliver. So this may only be changed through the perform integrated change control process. So change requests will be generated and decided upon whenever a change is requested. So this results in a project management plan that is progressively elaborated by controlled and approved updates extending through project closure. So here in change control, the approved change request may be a corrective action, a preventive action, or a defect repair, which we will go deeper. We will be discussing deeper on the next slide. So approved change requests are scheduled and implemented by the project team and can impact any area of the project or project management plan. As we have discussed in the previous slide, it may or may not affect the baselines that you have identified in your project. But it is important to understand how change control works, because approved change requests can also modify the formally controlled project management plan components or project documents. But it is also important to understand that this may happen at any phase during the whole course of the project implementation. So, what triggers these changes? So, there are a lot of triggers that you can possibly think of, right? Even when right now you are scanning your experiences in line with project management, so there may be legal restrictions that come up. There may be new legislations that come up. That's why you are forced to change, to introduce change, or to accommodate the change request with your in line with your project. And also there may be regulations, so government standards that may be newly passed, or there are new improvements on quality standards, safety standards. So these may be some of the factors that could trigger and will propel you to do a change control. So the changes that we're talking here may include, but are not limited to, these three that were identified in the PM book. First, we have corrective action, an intentional activity that realigns the performance of the project work with the project management plan. So, as I have mentioned earlier, so there may be some regulations that you need to adhere to. Kaya kailangan magkaroon ng changes to correct what were initially planned and identified in our project management plan. Preventive action, from the word itself, prevent, uh, it is an intentional activity that ensures the future performance of the project work is aligned with the project management plan. Similarly, it is something you do intentionally to ensure that you adhere to certain standards and make sure na hindi ka magkakaproblema in the future because of certain factors like we have identified previously. Defect repair. So if there is a part of your product or process that is non-conforming or a product component that may um, hinder you from achieving what your deliverables and your intended outcomes. So there may be repairs that you need to introduce even early on, even early on at the planning stage of your project management. So in order to facilitate configuration and change management that we're talking here in change control, so we have manual or automated tools that we may introduce or we may use. So as you can see here, this figure from the PMBOK manual um, is called Perform Integrated Change Control. So it presents the inputs, the tools and techniques, and the outputs that are identified in the PICC or the Perform Integrated Change Control. So as you can see here, we have several inputs that we have identified. So under the management plan, we have our change management plan and configuration management plan. And we also have scope baseline, schedule baseline, and cost baseline. So as I have also discussed previously, so we have already baselined, assuming that we have already baselined, right? Because we are already in the planning stage. So you already know your scope, you already know your schedule, your time, your timeline, and you already know the cost. So these are the inputs that you are considering. Configuration management plan. So it describes the configurable items of your project. So which of these are configurable. Management plan provides the direction for managing change control process and the documents and the roles and responsibilities for your change control board. So there may or may not be a change control board, but the role is crucial in change control. So for project documents, basically you have your basis of estimates. So how it indicates the duration, the cost, the resources, estimates were derived. So what is the basis of you coming up into the following scope, schedule, cost, and you have a projection or you may use that basis as basis rather to calculate the impact if there may be changes in scope, schedule, and cost that you introduce. So requirements traceability matrix speaks of your helps you assess the impact of the change on the project scope. So um, risk report presents information on sources of overall individual project risks involved by change requested. So work performance reports, of course, it speaks of resource availability, schedule and cost data, earned value reports. So these are also very crucial inputs as to how you are going to perform change control. So the change requests are, of course, um, may include the previously discussed corrective action, preventive, defect repairs. So many processes produce change control as the output, but these changes, again, may or may not directly affect your baselines. Sometimes the performance against the baselines are affected. So it may have an impact on the baselines. Normally, it's about the cost of implementing change, modifications in the schedules, resource requirements, whether you need um, to add or cut down on it, or the risks of doing that. So all of these should be approved by your uh, change control board if it exists, or by the customer, the sponsor, or your stakeholders. So the enterprise environmental factors that can influence the PICC process will also include what we have mentioned: your legal restrictions, regulations, and other constraints in line with your organization, policies, contracts. So those are the things that you are considering as your inputs. So organizational process assets include your procedures for approving, issuing change authorizations, so configuring management knowledge base, the versions of all official standards policies. So these are the inputs that you need to consider. So the tools and techniques that are under change control, perform integrated change control. First, we have expert judgment. So from that, we already know that it speaks of somebody with technical knowledge of the industry or of the project area. We also have expertise on legislation, regulations, legal and procurement, configuration management, risk management. So all of these very crucial expert fields or fields of expertise. So change control tools um, refer your to the specification of both the deliverables and the processes. So the tool selection should be based on the needs of the project stakeholders, including the organizational and environmental considerations. So you are considering a lot of factors here when you deploy your tools. So you need to identify configuration item, record and report configuration item status, perform configuration item verification, and audit. So the tool should support identification of changes, documentation of changes, decide decision that you need to make on changes, and of course the tracking of changes. So you also have data analysis. So it's important that you have data, you have alternatives analysis. So this is a technique used to assess the requested changes and decide which are accepted, rejected, or need to be modified. So you evaluate all the alternatives at hand. The cost benefit analysis, which we are familiar with, and it has also been previously discussed. So associate a certain option with a cost and then decide from there. So uh, we also have decision making. So we have decision making techniques like voting. So it could be a unanimous vote, majority vote. You also have autocratic decision making. So somebody takes responsibility for the entire group. So another is multi-criteria decision analysis. So you have a technique that you use a matrix to do a systematic analytical approach. So which is also very, very effective. So meetings, change control meetings are held with a change control board. So there you meet and discuss the changes, and you decide whether you approve, reject, or defer the changes that are being requested. So in perform integrated change control outputs, we have identified approved change requests. So these are processed according to the change management plan by the project manager, the change control board, or an assigned team member. And of course, we have an updated project management plan. So any of the components that might be affected by the change request or the approved change request. So, as we have discussed, it may have significant um, influence on the changes that you will deploy to your project management plan. And you also have project documents updates. So, any formally controlled project may have changes as a result of the process of change control. So, next, we have the key benefit of this process of change control is that it allows for documented changes within the project to be considered in an integrated manner while addressing overall project risk. So, as I have mentioned previously, change control may also be deployed in the other parts of your project management process. It's not only with the planning part. So, it addresses the overall project risks, and it often arises from changes made without consideration of the overall project objectives or plans. So, and it's the keyword also here that I'd like to highlight is documented changes. So it's important that the changes are being documented so that they are also being tracked.